best applause for Whitney.
Oh. Nepal. Okay, thanks so much. Nice to see so many familiar faces and some new faces. I don't know that I'm an expert in posthumanism, but it is something I know enough to be dangerous about. So I want to start off today by with a few definitions and a few sort of contextual quotations that help locate what I'm trying to do. The first one comes from Sylvia Winter, who's a decolonial scholar. And she really is thinking about the human of humanities. Who is the human of humanities? And the modern Western discipline that separates the humanities and the sciences, who is that human, right? So she writes here, Toni Morrison uncovers the terms of being educationally and socially habituated and domesticated in a world where the bluest eye is not only iconic of the Western bourgeoisie liberal monohumanist, phenotypically racially white, aesthetic corporal standard. In addition, she also gives origin to what can now be seen in hindsight as the positive signifiers and institutionalized and ostensibly universally applicable norm of being human and thereby of white beauty. That semantically active, the neurochemical opiate, blah, blah, blah. So what she's talking about, right? She says, look, the very idea of what counts as the humanities are being developed and sort of the modern Western disciplines that separates out the human sciences from the natural sciences and therefore takes what's human out of nature and leaves the rest, or sort of takes humans out of nature and makes them in sort of their own realm. That very human in the background there's an ideal subject there. And so she's really questioning what that ideal subject is and who that ideal subject is. And of course, following Toni Morrison, and it's no surprise that the modern Western disciplines that were being formulated in conjunction with the process of colonization, so on and so forth, led to an ideal subject that looked a lot like the modern Western Europeans that were thinking about these things, right? Perhaps blue-eyed, white, this sort of thing. So she says, basically, if that's the idea of the human and the humanities, then we need to rethink our disciplines a little bit, right? To open up that category of what is human. Also, in the background here is Masuzawa's work on the invention of world religions and how the idea of, many of you have talked about this. I know Mas Anshu writes about the difference between the indigenous paradigm and the world religions paradigm. But in the background is Masuzawa's invention of world religions, where she argues that the concept of religion is also formed, of course, during the colonial era. And so what we look for, the way that religions get constructed is based upon a very specific model of understanding what religion is and what it's not. On the other side of that, Walter Mignolo suggests in both the dark side of the Renaissance and the darker side of Western modernity that science is also formed, right, in this colonial period, right? And science, the development of modern science depends on colonization. It depends on something like the darker side of Western modernity, right? Which through development, right, of technologies increasingly in the 19th and 20th centuries, of course, leads to the underdevelopment of other places and certain places, right? And so both Masuzawa, Mignolo, and then along with Sylvia Winter are critiquing the very disciplines on which the modern university is founded, right? Starting with the basic distinction between humanities, or religion and science early on, but then going from there and thinking about that division between the human sciences and the natural sciences. Perhaps later with the social sciences, trying to make links between the two back and forth, right? So if that's true, if this very human of humanity is sort of based upon a modern Western normative understanding of what that is and what nature is, right? Nature is dead stuff, humans are outside of it. Then perhaps we need to undiscipline our thinking a little bit and allow other types of disciplinary thinking to enter into the university. So this is of course, this idea of humanity has lots of different roots. Some would argue it comes from an Imago Dei tradition. Others would argue that it begins well before that and sort of Platonic thought. Of course, there's that then ties into the Cartesian self, which is this isolated individual, so on and so forth. So there's lots of different roots in the modern Western understanding of what it means to be human. Okay, so that's one person that I'm looking at and thinking about this post-humanities, the issue of post-humanities. The second person really that I want to bring up here is Apko, who writes zoology, hold on, I forgot, racism as zoological witchcraft, right? So her work looks at the history of the development of sciences like zoology and also genetics and how it's tied up with issues of race and how its origins are quite racist, what we would think of as racist in many ways now. But she has a larger goal than just sort of pointing out this genealogy of the history of racism and the development of science, of the sciences. So she said, my goal is to show you how animality, a construct that oppresses anyone who deviates from what our culture considers to be an ideal human, right? So you get associated with animals if you're not this ideal sort of human, right? Over and over again, is an integral part of all the oppression you are already experiencing each day. As people of color, we won't reach racial liberation by examining only the violence we experience in isolation from other current social phenomena. We need to understand that this narrative of animality is the real problem, and that in order to meaningfully liberate animals and ourselves, we have to deal with and attack it, right? So what her solution is, and I think Winter agrees here, is that if we're going to attack racisms and sexisms and these sorts of things, and then what we need to do first is attack speciesism, the idea that humans are above nature. Because if you put humans in a space above nature, then you have automatically a sort of hierarchical ordering, right? And what counts as human? What gets to count as this sort of ideal human? If you're not that, then you're closer to nature, right? And therefore, you're subordinate, right? In this sort of hierarchical model. So what she says is, if we're going to attack these isms, we need to rethink. We need to return humans to nature and return vitality to the rest of the natural world, right? So that's the second person that I'm using. There are 4 of these, by the way. So just trying to give you the people I'm thinking with here in terms of post-humanities. The 4th is more properly Rossi Bradotti, who is one of the sort of experts or originators of post-human discourse. And she writes, I want to also point out here the difference between post-humanism and transhumanism. Both of them see that we either already live in or will soon live in a world beyond the Anthropocene, right? Beyond the human-defined sort of Earth that we tend to inhabit right now. Transhumanism wants to actually enhance humans to become more cyborg than biological, and wants to actually, this would be, the transhumanists would be people like Elon Musk that don't see a future for the planet, so we're going to build a new space station on Mars, right? And he's actually built rockets to go to space, and he has whole plans to do this. Or Jeff Bezos, right, who wants to build a space station so that the Earth can regenerate while we're living on the space station. Then sometimes whoever's left, right, who gets to live there, whoever's left can then go back and visit after a time the Earth like a natural park, right, like a national park. So that would be transhumanism, thinking of how humans are going to live and definitely seeing death as an anomaly so that we can live forever, this sort of thing. You may think that this is silly, but people are putting a lot of resources and technology transfer into a lot of these transhumanist ideas, right? Right. This past couple of years, we had 3 private citizens take their own rockets into outer space, right? And in a way that suggests to me there's a lot of money and resources on betting that we're going to have to leave this planet. And who is that we, right? Probably none of us in this room. Most people will be left behind. Okay, so posthumanism, however, is different. Posthumanism sees that we need to think beyond the human. We need to place the human within the context of the planetary, if you will, which I'll talk about in a minute, that concept. Or we need to think about what happens to the human as we evolve beyond humanity, right, so to speak. So, so posthumanism does not want to leave the planet, but admits our embeddedness within the planet, right? And in some senses, our Bradotti and others argue that we're already in a posthuman world, right? We are already parts of our microbiome, for instance, right? These sorts of things that most of the cells that make up our bodies are not human, right? They're other sort of critters and bacteria and viruses and these sorts of things. So we exist as ecosystems, right? So it's not like we're these isolated humans, right? Anyways, okay. She writes here in the post-human, what the post-human convergence points to instead is a multi-directional opening that allows for multiple possibilities and calls for experimental forms of mobilization, discussion, and at times even resistance. The keyword of post-human scholarship is multiplicity. The range of post-human options is wide and growing. As the chapters in this book, blah, blah, blah. Post-human knowledge will also provide some guidelines for assessing. Okay, I could have left that last bit out. But what she wants to say is that there's not just one post-human, but the point is to think beyond the ways in which we've constructed our worlds thus far and to imagine new possibilities for being human in the world. Because what all three of these thinkers, and I think the next one also would think, is that the way that the modern Western world has structured our disciplines and the technology transfer from that has brought us things like global climate change, a mass extinction, the sixth mass great extinction period, right? Has brought us economic inequities, gross economic inequities and injustices on a global scale. So if that's the case, if our knowledge systems are failing us in some major ways, then maybe we need to undiscipline and rediscipline ourselves towards a different way of thinking about the world and humans therein. Okay, the fourth area, oh my God, there's one more, there's five of them, sorry. The fourth area of scholarship that I draw on is some indigenous methodologies and indigenous studies research, right? So one of the things that posthumanism and indigenous methodologies have in common is that they want to see the human as part of the rest of the natural world. And also, at least for posthumanism, technology and everything that is human as part of nature too. So there's a human, technology, nature spectrum, right? Okay, so this is, I can't remember Kovach's first name, but anyways, Professor Kovach, we'll call her. I think it's Margaret maybe. Anyways, she writes that the modern Western model assumes that the universe is empty, static space where atoms and particles live independent of each other and do not shift or change. God, through Newtonian physics, does not have a role in the cause and effect of the universe, and prophecy or a greater purpose does not exist, as life is simply a cause and effect dynamic, and all energy patterns can be accounted for by human intellect, with humans as all-knowing, right? She's trying to articulate what, from her own experience doing research as an Indigenous woman and with Indigenous people, the difference in worldview from the modern Western worldview and that of many Indigenous peoples, right? That nature is just dead stuff, right? That humans are above nature, and that there's nothing beyond the mere material world, right? And she basically, argues that for Indigenous people, having to go into a modern Western style conversation and educational system, this is sort of death to their own ways of thinking and their own ways of relating to each other and the rest of the natural world, right? So for her, whatever else Indigenous methodologies do, they need to be based in some sort of animism or some type of spirit in nature, some sort of eminent way of thinking about ideas and how they matter, or reason and humans as part of an ongoing emergent process of nature. She also very much, along with other feminists and other types of critical theories, understands knowing as always embodied, right? That we can only know from a specific subject position. And so for that reason, what she argues is a big part of her methodologies and many other indigenous methodologies is storytelling, right? And telling each other's stories together so that we can weave together different stories from different places, right? So rather than being a sort of universal mono understanding of truth, she also argues that truth has to have these multiple perspectives and that there's a pluriverse and so on and so forth, right? So we need to, the more perspectives we get on a given situation, the better understanding we're going to have of that thing, place, event, situation, text, right? The more hermeneutics of a text, the better, right? Because it gives us the different perspectives from different embodiments into the life of a given text, right? So to speak. So for her, knowledge is intersubjective, value laden. It's always knowledge for, and humans are embedded in this larger planetary community. And place is very important, of course, right? Place is not just a background, but it's integral to culture, language, history of a given community. Very different from the knowledge that travels everywhere and is the same for all time and all places, right? Not that that is not a form of knowledge. I don't want anyone in the room to think that I'm saying throw out modern Western knowledge. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm trying to do is show it as another form of knowledge, and that there are other forms of knowledge that we might want to listen to. Okay. Not all ideas are good ones either. I don't want you to think that. Not all perspectives are equal, but we'll come back to that. Okay, so that is sort of my reason for talking about posthumanism and talking about rethinking the disciplines and decolonizing, whatever you want to call it. But we can't do this deconstruction in a vacuum, right? And so the best thing that I can come up with is this idea of the planetary, right? What are we deconstructing and reconstructing towards? Perhaps we're deconstructing this these modern Western disciplines because they've led to some serious problems, and perhaps we could organize them towards a planetary context, right? Rather than being parochialized into a sort of coming from a Euro-Western context and then projecting that as universal for all times and all places, right? And I get this idea of the planetary from people like Gayatri Spivak, who associates this as, she juxtaposes it with the global. The global is the view from nowhere. The planetary is the multiple views from below that connect together to get a better understanding of what the planet is like, right? Walter Mignolo also talks about the planetary and both in a lot of his work in a similar way. And William Connolly talks about it in his political ecology work as sort of in the form of new materialism, right? That we are all planetary creatures and whatever else exists, it's because it emerged in this process of geoevolution and so on and so forth. So religions, ideas, values, they all are part of this world, right? So this is the sort of new materialism. Our ideas are not sort of unrelated to the material world. Rather, we have ideas collectively together and values, and they return to shape the world in specific ways. They shape our bodies in terms of what we wear, who we sleep with, who we can marry, what we can eat, what types of buildings we live in, these sorts of things, how we orient ourselves in the world. And they shape other Earth bodies, right? In terms of what is available for human use and what is not, right? So this is a type of new materialistic way of understanding the power of religions, right? As this collective sort of ongoing projection that returns to shape bodies. So I'm using the planetary in the context in which they talk about it. Within this context, right, as Walter Mignolo argues, there's not a single, the planet isn't preformed, but there are many different worlds can make up the planet at any one time. The planet is an emerging process, right? of different organisms and assemblages and feedback loops that is a living sort of thing, right? So it's not this preformed static thing. So we're not saying that everything has to fit into this manifestation of of the planetary community, but that at any given time, all the different worlds, human and non, that make up the planet are the planetary community, right? And these are sort of moving targets, right? So we have to take some time to reattune to the new ways in which the planet is evolving. We need to take time to reattune to pandemics, right? We need to take the time to reattune to the effects of climate change and climate refugees and the extinction of species, right? All these things that are changing in our planet require us to stop and rethink what it is we're doing, so to speak. Okay. I find Anna Tsing also helpful here in terms of thinking about, that's Anna there. I'm surprised she let this picture on the interwebs because most of her pictures are of her younger self. So, but anyways, she has this project Feral Atlas. If you haven't seen it, it's a free online resource that's looking at the different sort of planetary connections and networks that are happening at this moment, right? So it's an ongoing living publication project that I really still want to know how she got Stanford University Press to let her do for free online as this project. Anyways, she writes here, other species, as well as non-living things, make it possible to be human. That this statement is not obvious to many humans at this moment in time is only because of habits of thought that have become powerful over the last few hundred years, i.e. that human exceptionalism, that humans aren't part of the planet. In this modernist mode of thinking, humans presume to transcend and master nature rather than forming worlds together with non-humans. One significance of recent discussion, of the Anthropocene as a time of human-sponsored environmental crisis is that it urges us away from those powerful habits of thought. The imagined mastery of humans no longer looks so successful. We're asked to reconsider the ways in which human and non-human histories are inextricably intertwined. The Anthropocene, like every other trajectory in which humans have been involved, is more than human. And part of her argument in Feral Atlas and part of the some post-humanist argument is that whatever it means to be human, it's not in spite of the rest of the planetary community, it's because of it. We are only human because we are planetary creatures. And evolutionarily speaking, ecologically speaking, and much of our culture and imagination probably derives from earlier forms of creativity, right? So for instance, other people can talk about this better, but early bone flutes that mimic bird song, right? And somehow now we sing operas and have all sorts of different music. So whatever we attribute to the humanness of our humanity is due to our embeddedness within the rest of the natural world and not in spite of it, is what she is trying to argue. Okay, so again, we need this. We need to reattune our thinking, to reattune ourselves to this context of climate change, globalization, pandemic, right? So perhaps what we need is some undisciplined thinking for a little bit, some interdisciplinary thinking, multidisciplinary thinking, or storytelling and yarning, right? We need something to help us think in a different way about what it is we're doing, about what types of worlds we want to foster and help co-create in the future. Jack Halberstam I find useful here. He writes about the queer art of failure. In a system that is causing oppressions and injustices, we should fail the system, right? Our duty is to fail the system and fail boldly, right? Some of that is going on here too, but sort of how do we deconstruct and then reconstruct, right? Again, it's not just enough to deconstruct. What I want to talk about mostly is the planetary humanities, but maybe it's the post-planetary humanities. I don't know what to call it. We don't have to come up with a name today, and it just gets more ridiculous sounding when you start to try. But I do think that there are, since we're at CRCS and ICRS here, I do think there are lots of religious sources for planetary reattunements or for reattuning in general, right? If you think about our religion, many of them are founded upon critiquing the aesthetics of an unjust world and thinking about a new world to come, right? That's a reattunement, right? This world is unjust, unethical. We need to think of a new world to come, a new kingdom, right? A new paradise, a new Eden, whatever. This is what some, and that's also for ethical, right? Slavery, discrimination is wrong. I want to take my people out of here, move away, go somewhere else, start a new life. The Buddha, right? Extreme poverty, extreme wealth. No, here's a middle path, right? So they're formed against what they perceive to be wrong ways of living and are offering reattunements towards new ways of becoming, right? Music can do this too. That we have, for instance, chanting, singing. These are about, music takes us outside of ourselves and connects us to a larger community of people that are chanting or singing, right? One person does not a choir make, right? And literally instruments and orchestras and other forms of music are about attuning to one another, right? And I think that that's a much better way of thinking about what it is we're doing. We're attuning to one another at a given moment, right? So that we can make some sort of sound, whether that's harmony or polyphony, whatever. But that's kind of like a good metaphor for what the planet is doing, or what the planetary community moment by moment might look like. There are bodily reattunements, right? Yoga, meditation, dancing, and other rituals help us to get back into our bodies and attune ourselves to the way our bodies are related to other bodies even, right? The whole point of, or part of the points of yoga and meditation is to recognize how your actions are affecting and ripple effects the others around you, right? In certain ways. There's also a whole ton of epistemological tools for reattuning, right? We have trickster figures, right? That are all about saying, you think you know what you know, but you don't. So let me just blur these boundaries. Let me show you how little you know, that sort of thing. We have negative and iconoclastic thinking and religions. Most of the mystical forms of most of the non-dominant mystical forms of most of the major world religions have these sorts of negative and iconoclastic ways of thinking, right? There's also, of course, whole traditions of textual hermeneutics, right? How does this text speak to the oppression of women, people of color? How does this text speak to environmental issues, right? These sorts of things, right? So there's a whole tradition of helping, of rereading text so that they are attuned to our current context, right? And this happens, of course, not just around sort of these critical identity issues, but also every time a religion, you know, the Islam in Indonesia is different from Islam in Saudi, it's different from Islam that people in Chicago, right, practice, for instance, right? So these are different rereadings of the same sort of text and tradition. And also we have, I think, some pretty old models for what sort of thinking beyond anthropocentrism, or thinking beyond humanity towards human and relationship. We have some pretty old models in the world's religious traditions, right? You've got things like Hanuman and Ganesha, right? These are hybridized gods, right? If you will. You've got the jinn, right? That are very, very popular in many Muslim cultures. These are sort of between the spirits and the living, right? This sort of things. You have the Trinity, right? Which is the Father, Son, and usually a bird, right? So literally, you have how this is articulated is a post-human sort of way, right? And of course, you have the coyote, who takes on many forms, the trickster coyote, this sort of thing. So again, this not all value, not all agency resides in this thing that we call humanity, and then try to seal off from the rest of the natural world. But even our religious traditions have these sort of hybrid figures right, in them. So I don't think it's too far of a stretch to think towards a post-human form of way of thinking. So the critical, what I'm going to call the critical planetary humanities, just put it that. Building upon all of those thinkers that I just talked about and the religious resources that we have to think with the post-humanities, the critical planetary humanities are based on this idea that different bodies matter, right? Different embodiments matter, right? But if we live in a world that has a flat ontology, right? That is an immanent world, then knowledge is not something up here that everyone ascends to, but knowledge of is always from a particular place. So you have to listen to the multiple perspectives in order to get a better understanding of any given situation, right? And so I think we do need these critical theories, right, of race, gender, queer studies, disability studies, class-based theories, right? I think we still need these post and decolonial understandings. Post-humanisms are an important part. Science and technology studies, right? Affect theories, because we're not just reasonable. We exist in long habits of desires and value and ways that our hopes and dreams are sort of geared toward, right? So we need to look at affect theories, all the things that are not reasonable about what humans do in our daily lives. I think indigenous methodologies are important, and object-oriented ontologies. I'm not going to say anything about that, except for the next slide will give you an example of someone who has taken that seriously. But I also think this is important. This is probably the most important. We need more science fiction and futuristic imaginings, right? We need art, poetry, dance. We need things that can help us imagine in different ways towards a different future. It can't just be an extension of more of the same. I mean, it can be, but I don't necessarily think that that is the best way to go in terms of how to think about how we structure our understanding of what it means to be human in the world moving forward. Okay, now is my picture sharing time. And it won't be much longer, and then I'll be done. So there's some cool examples of this, right? Bjork has always been sort of this post-human hybrid figure. She's always fiddling with technology and animals in all of her costumes, right? And interestingly enough, she is good friends with Timothy Morton, who is one of the largest proponents of object-oriented ontology, right? That sees this hybrid understanding of organisms and assemblages, right? She actually, if you look up his Amazon page, she has this like, hello, I'm Bjork. She doesn't say it, but she's like writing all this, like, this is the best theorists in the world, you know, this sort of thing. And then Timothy Morton also wrote, she did a museum exhibit at the SF MoMA, and Timothy Morton wrote all the text for that, right? So she's directly involved in terms of this post-human thinking, right? And a lot of her projects, I think, reveal that imagination, right? That blur human, animal, and technology, right? For what it's worth. This is another interesting Netflix show called Sweet Tooth, right? And in this show, we are introduced to a post-apocalyptic world in which the hybrids have tried to kill the humans. Of course, this main character is a hybrid that does not want to kill the humans, but all the humans want to kill him, except for a sympathetic group of non-hybrids that take him in and hide him. And so the story goes, right? So all this to say, the post-human is often treated as monstrous, as an abomination, as a perversion, right? It's a monster right there. Just like on the outside of medieval maps, right? There's dragons, right? There be dragons there. Don't go outside of the map, the ordered world, right? That is kind of what happens with these types of shows, right? And they're I know it's not the intention of the show, but what it does is it polices the boundary, right? Don't cross the border into this post-human way of thinking, because it's going to lead to this apocalypse of humanity, right? This sort of thing. Or in this other show, which is a very depressing um, a very depressing, I think it's a Norwegian film, but anyways, called Lamb. And these really isolated lamb farmers up in the mountains have a half lamb. The mother gives birth to a half lamb, half girl. And it's about them. It's about them coming to terms with this, right? And trying to hide it from people, because when people find out, they're scared and they want to kill it, right? Like, this is an abomination. Once again, it's a policing of the idea of what it means to be human, and it ends up in a really scary way, just to reinforce that these are perversions, right? And we shouldn't allow our imagination to think in such hybrid ways. But then you have like the sexy hybrids, right? The X-Men, right? Who doesn't want to be an X-Men? Or Wakanda Forever, the Black Panther, right? These superheroes are also hybrids of technology, human, animal, and sometimes including some superpowers, right? So divine, right? So there's all these models, I think, in the popular imagination that are both positive and some that are completely monstrous and negative. And I'm curious. Okay, that's kind of the fun stuff with it. But there's also events that we can think of, right? The post-human world, right? Hurricanes, right? These are these giant mega events that are well beyond any human scale. That would suggest to me that this world was not made for humans in any sort of designed way, right? These chaotic systems are getting worse and worse, right? Because we, of course, of fossil fuels, global climate change. But this is what might be called a super object, right? And I only point this out because this is an example of thinking thinking in different terms about the problem of climate change. So one of my colleagues who studies Afro-Caribbean traditions thinks of, rather than climate change as something we've done, thinks about us as being possessed by fossil fuels and fossil fuel speed. So it's a demon that possesses, and the demon manifests as climate change, right? And so we need to be exorcised of our fossil fuel use. And if you've ever tried to live a day without any petroleum project, you know that's it's pretty much impossible, right? So that's the reason that I bring this up. This is kind of what the post-humanists are saying. We're not really in control. We know scientifically what we can do. We know all the facts and the data, but still we're worse off than we were 30 years ago in terms of climate change, right? So what's going on there? There's got to be something more than just data and facts. Another interesting post-human pondering, right? This is one of the largest single organisms in the world. It's a giant fungi colony that's all connected in Oregon, right? And it's been regenerating for hundreds of years, right? So there are other organisms, there are other living organisms, right? We might just look at this and think, oh, mushrooms, but it's a whole single organism that communicates underground through its fibers, right? I forgot what you call those little cilia things, but anyways, they communicate. It communicates across. It helps trees to communicate with each other, right? So trees communicate through electrical signals that these mycelium help to foster, right? So point being, the planet is a lot more live than we are used to thinking, right? Trees can actually, a mother tree, if you will, that has saplings that have fallen off, can send nutrients through these mycelium networks to the little sapling, right? So, or it can encourage the saplings further out. If it knows that there's a problem here, it can encourage the saplings further out to develop and not waste resources on the ones that are closer, right? So there's all sorts of interesting botany that's being done around this right now. This is another single organism. This is in Utah called Pandopopulus, and it's the largest known single colony of aspens, right? That all have a single root system. It goes all the way back there. So these are not just, we would look at it and say these are single trees, but it's actually a giant single organism, right? And that's part of the point too, right? As humans, we're trained to see tree, tree, tree. Oh, this whole thing's a forest. We look at that and not think, oh, that's one single organism, right? Because we're looking at it from this sort of, from the only thing we can look at it, which is the concept of this is tree, right? But why are we separating out tree from the other roots underground and the dirt and the sunlight and the oxygen, right? At some point we have to say, we're going to call this thing something. But in terms of the modern Western reductive productive model of science, we have decided to name things based upon a resource-based model, right? Tree is wood, coal is energy, right? These sorts of things. Human is labor, right? So that's the question. How can we think differently, right? About how can we reorient our sciences to see things as not just resources, but to point out these different types of living, alive organisms, right? And what do we do with that? Another example, right? The frequency at which we hear, right? We could say the same about what we see, right? Whales can communicate up to 1,000 kilometers away, right? I can't do that. Well, I can with a cell phone, but the whales don't have cell phones. So, but just to show that, just to say that what we hear shapes the way that we understand the world. But think about it, all these different frequencies at which these different animals hear, and think about what worlds they must be creating, right? Or what type of experience they have in the world, right? So it's not just, this is not just a human world, right? That we live in. It's designed to support a multiplicity of experiences of life, right? So to speak. The bee dance, right? There was just a study that came out yesterday. I was just listening to the radio. Well, the bee dance is very intricate, right? And I'm sure that you've heard about the way that they communicate in terms of the woggle, the way they woggle their butts, and it helps lead the others to the pollination places and that sort of thing. But they also apparently, bees like to play. So there are these apiists, not atheists, but apiists, people who study bees, that are looking at how bees play, right? What does that mean, right? What is it? Do they have like a little football? No, but if bees have a sense of play, right? That means that even at the level of the insect world, there's some sort of feeling, right? Because why choose to play when you should just be working, right? So some sort of decision or feeling, right? But and that's just like this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of animal studies and how much animals are communicating and how much they're experiencing and this sort of thing. And a lot of some zoologists and what am I thinking? Entomologists, yeah, entomologists think that we're not too far from communication, but I don't know about that. I don't know. Who knows? Okay, this is the CERN atom smasher, right? By the way, they have this at the entrance to CERN. They have a dancing Shiva, which I think is really interesting. Right, again, the things that they're finding out about the structure of the universe and the structure of the very small through this, is this all created for humans, right? I don't know. It seems to be pretty far-fetched to think so. So I think technologies like this also can help us to think, wow, the scale, right? The immense scale of the universe and the immense minutia of the quantum level don't really suggest that, that it was all created just for this level of life, right? But anyways, it's another sort of source for thinking about the post-human. Urban ecology, right? This is a future imagination of a city as an organism, right? Cities are already organisms. They're just more like predators right now because they take in all this material and resources and they just spit out a bunch of waste, right? But what if we thought of the city as an organism in relationship to other organisms and thought of cradle to cradle technologies rather than cradle to grave technologies, right? So that all the waste is recycled and in different ways and this sort of thing. And there are engineers and There's a whole science of biomimicry that's trying to look at technologies that are more cradle to cradle, right? And this sort of thing. Another, right? This is the map of fiber optic cables globally, right? And the network that they create. I don't remember why I put that in there, so I'm just going to skip it. Okay, this is an image of Gaia, right? And so there are lots of from James Lovelock and Lynn Margulies to Bruno Latour. More recently, there are lots of people that are really taking seriously now this idea of the Earth as a living organism in itself, right? So again, this is the Earth, Gaia, is a hyper object of which we are parts, right? So that a sort of way of thinking about a post-human planet. Of course, then pictures of the universe. Always need to throw one of those in there to remind us how small we are. Is this really all made for the central actor named Homo sapien? I don't know. So I just want to leave you them with this, a quote for a different scale of thinking that pays deep attention, that sort of stays with the trouble in the way that Donna Haraway talks about, right? Don't let your thinking take you far away to too many abstractions, but stay with the specifics. And you all are actually very good at that in my experience. Those of you who are doing work here at ICRS, CRCS always have the most interesting specific projects in the whole world. And you're really dealing with the details and the data, right? And I think that's good. And you should really keep doing that. But Bruno Latour in his last book, After Lockdown, A Metamorphosis, he writes, termites should be our role models, right? Termites should be our role models because they do not lay waste to the earth, nor are any of them insect Elon Musks who seek to relocate to another planet. That is escapist. But when you think in terms of a critical zone, you're locked in, you cannot escape. A critical zone is a space between 2 and 3 kilometers thick above and below the surface of the earth, but all discovered life is within it, right? So maybe we need to think more like termites, or at least more like creatures of the planet than we have in the past, right? And to me, this is the sort of the power that post-humanities and sort of planetary thinking can help us do. Okay, I'm done. That's it.
It's a really wonderful thing that we have for the discussion today, and it's really interesting about other thing that you mentioned about the planetary reattunements. It's sometimes it's very interesting because it helps us to calculate modernity as it's another form of knowledge. It's not that we reject modernity, but let's take it into another form of knowledge that could be duplicates into like different interpretations of us and makes us possibly see that we cannot separate with the image. Okay then, so first 3 questions.
Oh no. I knew that was going to happen.
But the thing that people sort of always leave out is the problem of evil. And yeah, you can have multiple here, but it sounds really good to say you can have multiple different communities, but you can have some really nasty as well. You can have Stalin, you can have Hitler, you can have Donald Trump, and it's really different. When you start thinking about that, this idea that we have to have multiple intersecting communities that all connect. So it just always strikes me as incomplete.
Yeah. So I'll say a couple things there. I'll say 2 things that I will start to deal with that and tell you about, but you probably won't be satisfied. I'm just pre-warning you. One is that nature and natural does not mean good, right? Pandemics, cancer, the AIDS virus, these are all part of nature too. We are eventually going to be food for something else, right? So nature does not mean good, and natural doesn't mean good. That's why I always want to include technology and humans as part of nature, right? So that's one thing. To your second question, yes, fake news, alternative facts, conspiracy theories, these sorts of things. I will say this. The people that I know who abide by fake news, alternative facts, and conspiracy theories are certain of themselves, and no one else perspective can get in, right? So they are not able to entertain multiple perspectives, and that is always a ding, ding, ding sign for me, right? And so that's part of it. If you cannot accommodate multiple perspectives, then perhaps go somewhere else, right? But also, Mark, I think that most of the perspectives on a scatter plot you can put a circle around it, and there's going to be these outliers out here, right? And so that's the way I think about it. But I think the majority of perspectives are going to be, there's a multiple perspectives within a reasonable boundary that does not cause harm to others, human and earth others, right? Or that does not wish harm. Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, there's an event could happen. Okay, so we can agree that this is a nut, a peanut, something that you eat. We can call it by many different names, but it's not an orange, right?
Yeah.
And it's not an apple. So I think that we have to come to some common grounds, right? Gravity. Pretty sure we can agree on that. I think that we can agree that we're on a planet.
I don't say that it's around.
Okay, fine, fine. It might not be around, but we're on a planet. I think that we can agree that we're all in this room humans, right? That we need oxygen, that we need water. So I think that because we don't create the world ourselves, we're already coming into a world that has been co-created by other creatures and organisms. And the importance of placing humans within that context is that that's reality pushing back on our idiotic projections, right? That are too far out, I guess. Does that make some little bit? I know that it's probably not going to satisfy you, but
Good answer, but I think it important that I think you have to be aware of that it's probably one of those unsolvable questions.
yeah. That's what we like to ask here, right? Yeah. Well, we have an election going on right now in the US that's probably going to be really depressing. So right, but thank you. No, and I really get that point, and yeah, yeah.
Maybe that's it. But then again,
Don't ever say that.
All right. 2 questions. Or any comments? Then I'll start to ask.
Okay.
I have questions. As you mentioned earlier about the book of Masuzawa, The Invention of Religion. And I would like to ask, where is the positions or the stance of world religion paradigm in post-humanism world? As far as I know that I have discussed with Masanchu yesterday that he said that the post-humanism is the antithesis of this world religion paradigms. And how do you see the world religion paradigm in this planetary thinking?
Well, I'm going to answer that in the way that I understand it. I think what we're really talking about is the post-humanism being a problem for monotheism. I think that, more relational ontologies don't have as much of a problem with the post-human as do monotheisms that that see humans as in this special place, sort of. And I'm not saying other religions don't, right? Of course, in many forms of Buddhism, you can't be enlightened until you're reincarnated as a human and a male human and maybe a monk, so these sorts of things. But I do think a more relational ontology doesn't have as big problems with this idea of humans being embedded within entanglements of other life forms, right? As do monotheisms that have much more of a idea of things being created in specific ways, and there's binary gender and binary sex and these sorts of things, and that everything's ordered, in a certain single mono structure, right? I think that post-humanism is a problem for that. And of course, the world religions paradigm is articulated through a monotheistic understanding of what religion is, right? During the colonial era. So I don't necessarily need religions to go away or anything, or world religions to go away. I just need, or I just want this idea of human exceptionalism to go away. And of course, there are traditions, non-dominant traditions within monotheisms that suggest that humans are also a part of nature. One German theologian, sorry, that articulated this in the early 80s even, Jürgen Moltmann, suggests that being made in the image of God does not mean that we are above nature, but God is Trinitarian, so it means that we're relational. So we only become human when we live in right relations with others and with the rest of the natural world, right? So that's a different understanding from a Christian tradition of what it means to be made in the image of God, right? Can we modify an understanding of vice regents as managers, right? I think the managerial idea is what gets us in trouble to begin with. But anyways, that's not an answer, but I'm just saying I want to not say it's a world religions problem, but it's really a problem for monotheism, I think.
Do you think that monotheism is quite responsible for the monstrous depictions of posthumanism as we see like the hybrids? Like with the spider entity, like human usually would be like this structure and along with the roles that comes with it, and then animals should be that, and then nature was created by God to fulfill humans' needs. And do you think this?
Well, I'm not going to stand up here and solely point the finger at monotheism. There are many different monotheisms. There are many different strands. There are much more eminent understandings of monotheisms, particularly amongst, again, the more mystical, non-dominant traditions of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. So I'm not going to point the finger at monotheism. I think what the problem is more is human exceptionalism, however it gets articulated. You can find human exceptionalism in the Greco-Roman world. You can find it in many different cultures and traditions, that humans are somehow special, right? So I do think it's also a scientific, it has to be a scientific assumption, at least of the, even though science places us in an evolutionary context, we still see other animals and the rest of the natural world as resource through this sort of materialistic reductive paradigm, right? So yeah, I think there's multiple players, and it's not just any one thing for sure. Where am I supposed to look?
Yeah, thank you for the. So I have a friend. He's watching now. He's a graduate student from biotechnology from Atmajaya, Jakarta. So his
hundreds and maybe thousands of years now already comes to a point where even our genetic level of existence, we can edit, we can manipulate, and even I think in many aspects of our existence as humans, has created a sense that human is very powerful. If I want to make the wood become oil, I can do it. If I want to go to Mars, I can do it. If I want to do something to nature, I can do it. The science progress has already made us feel that way. But you, in your presentation, we have to see ourselves as part of nature. So I think there will be a challenge that us as part of nature, but also as the part of nature that has the ability to manipulate nature. So do you think that it will not have like negative consequence that we want to deconstruct this way of thinking, but our progress has already made us so powerful, so imbalanced in our relation. Do you think this is going to how do you respond to that? I mean, that's the first question from my friend.
There's another one.
The second question. My friend. I think this is this perspective is kind of our desire to cling on to existence to prevent our death as collectively as human. Do you think this is not the way for us to avoid death collectively? Because if human is rapidly growing, is an invasive species in our planet, and somehow they are dooming themselves with their ways of life, isn't that natural for us to go extinct?
Some easy questions. So first of all, I would say the planet doesn't need us, we need the planet, right? So there's a little bit of, the question is not whether or not the planet's going to live on. It will in some sort of way, and it'll regenerate as it has done many times before. The question is, what type of worlds do we want to help co-create, and do we want to to have some sort of place here, right? So of course, every individual organism wants to stay alive, right? And wants to, and I think, you know, has it's okay to create a space where you can dwell for a while, right? Is it okay to create a space as big as Bill Gates? Probably not. Is it okay to live longer than 90 years and live into 200 through technologies and research? Maybe not, right? But I think there is some sort of, by virtue of living, we have to kill other things, right? And that's just part of life. So I'm not saying that there's going to be some sort of utopia where the lion lies with the lamb and blah, 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 right? And we're all happy vegetarians and whatever. So that's not what I'm trying to say. Second, if I remember, okay, so the question is not, the question is not about whether or not we are advanced tool users, advanced tool using creatures, right? And advanced creatures that can plan things and choose between things, right? That's not the question, but where did all of that come from, right? If we start living as if we don't need that, the rest of it, then we are just cutting our life support off from ourselves, right? So the question, maybe it's enlightened self-interest to see humans as part of nature, but how can we create technologies that are not just for humans, but for the planetary community? How do we create technologies, again, that allow room for other organisms to thrive, right? That allow for a biodiverse, for biodiversity in ecosystems, and I think when we start thinking about that, what type of worlds do we want to help co-create? We can't do it willy-nilly. We might be able to for a while, right? Through fossil fuel technologies, we can do sort of might makes right, but it's going to lead to climate change. It's going to lead to social injustice that's due to environmental waste and the destructive things that resource extraction costs. Right, there's going to be a cost to it that eventually will build up and sort of cause the system to fall apart, which is what I think is happening now, right? So I think that part of the way that we've thought right now has been, at least in the last 150 years, fossil fueled. And to your friend's point, I think that we have started to think outside of this world, like our hopes and desires and dreams are outside of this world. What we can expect to do in one lifetime is way more than what our grandparents or their grandparents could do in one lifetime, just because we can do things faster and faster, right? Multiple careers, moving around the world, moving resources around the world to you, learning about different things online, right? So what we can do in a lifetime is extremely fossil fueled. And if our hopes and dreams are tied up to that, then that's going to be eventually hit a cliff, right? So one of the things that I really like, or not like, if you can like anything about a pandemic, sorry, that was sounded bad. Don't repeat that. One of the things that I found, at least in my own context, where I was teaching from home, not going anywhere through Zoom, right? This is a privileged context, and I realized that. But slowing down was awfully nice. Slowing down allowed me to notice things in my life in my neighborhood that I hadn't noticed before, different types of birds. It allowed me to start baking. And it turns out I really like that, right? It's sort of meditative practice. It allowed me to slow down and think about all sorts of different things, right? Rather than being rush all the time. So I think, anyways, I don't know where I was going with that. Can we find technologies that help us to live within the regenerative capacities of the planet, rather than as if those limits don't exist? So it's not a question of if we use technology and if we use advanced technology and sort of having power over. Sure, we can force things, but why force things when you can cooperate in many ways, right? This whole idea that evolution is about survival of the fittest misses the whole idea that most of life takes cooperation to exist. If life didn't cooperate, there would be no ecosystems, there would be no organisms that came together from multiple organisms, right? So there's cooperation that happens, and not just this constant drive for survival of the fittest in competition, right?
Yeah, I want to add to that. I see that one of the problem, maybe I see in many ecological discourse is we already have deliberately avoid our extinction when we see that as that. I mean, we are supposed to not live forever, as you already said, but also collectively, not only individually as one person, but collectively we're not supposed to. I mean, maybe we can change evolutionary, but maybe we can just die because of the oil ecstasy. I think one problem that I have is in many discourse is the position of death and extinction in ecological discourse. Because if we assume that if one of our assumption is for human to live forever along with nature, but still living like for billions of years, I think there will be a negative access of that.
But this is part of the exact point of post-humanistic thinking, right? It's why have we just decided that humans are not evolving anymore, and we're not evolving along with other organisms? We reify humanity and project it way into the future, a future of space exploration and all sorts of things, right? But why do we assume that future rather than we're part of an evolving community of things on the planet? So eventually Homo sapiens will be evolve beyond Homo sapiens, right? Maybe that'll be in some sort of cyborg sort of way, or maybe it'll be more organismic. I don't know, right? But that, I mean, even though that's going to take millions of years, we won't know it when it's happening, right? Because these are usually incremental changes, or maybe it'll be a catastrophic change, right? But nonetheless, we are not, evolution hasn't ended, right? So it's kind of strange to think that we, yeah.
Because of the
Sure.
biological, which are billions here.
Mhm. Right.
Certainly not like
Yeah.
because they're not.
No, I certainly didn't mean to suggest that. But Mark, you also bring up a good point, right? That um, the human civilizations as we know it have existed because of a relatively stable period of climate in the past 30 to 40,000 years. What's that? In the past 30,000 years or so, right? So there's been so all of human civilizations that we know of, in part, came about because of a relatively stable climate, right? And now that's shifting. What does that mean, right? Anyways, that's these. Yeah, exactly. Nobody knows, right? I only bring up that evolutionary analogy to say that if we think of our, because humans are always thinking about the future, I think it's part of what we do in terms of our daily trying to make sense of our lives. I did this yesterday, I'm doing this today, and I'm going towards this, right? Or maybe I'm just, anyway, something like that. So I think that we're always going to be thinking about the future. And if we imagine the future as the same sort of as now, then we're going to continue in the same practice. I really think creative nonfiction that imagines sort of really radically different possibilities is helpful for opening up our minds a little bit to towards reintegrating humans or integrating humans in our, at least in our thought processes, along with the rest of the planetary community.
There was a period there where it was.
Mhm. Well, there's lots of great Afrofuturism going on right now, because you know, to like, this is why I love the Wakanda and Black Panther series, right? It's because it's imagining a sort of futuristic scenario in which it's not all just sort of, you know, people wearing the same clothes, racially the same sort of thing. But you know, so all these issues that we think of now get taken up into projections of the future, right? So this is why Donna Haraway, for instance, at the end of her Staying with the Trouble, has 3 chapters, 3 scenarios of possible future, and it's all science fiction, right? She just made up this science fiction story to say, okay, and this is what I think, because she thinks that if we're going to think ourselves out of the current problems we're in, we need to have new ways of thinking, right? They can't just rely on what we've done before and project that onto the future, right? So that's the only reason why I think it's helpful to think about how we might evolve beyond ourselves. Not that's going to happen in our lifetime or or anybody's lifetime anytime soon, but just to conceptually think about it, imagine it. You were going to say something. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned earlier about indigenous language, I think I just want to ask a question. Indigenous language. You mentioned about is it possible this kind of thing like hydrology manifest
Yeah, I will try. Let's see. First of all, in terms of, I don't want to say too much about. I'm definitely not an indigenous researcher, and nor am I creating indigenous knowledge. That's not what I want to suggest. I want to be very careful about how I'm using this work from indigenous scholars. What I'm trying to suggest is that they do offer at least a counter to this sort of cold, objective Western model style of knowledge, right? That we need to pay attention to the subject that's doing the observing as well, right? And if you're going to do that, then you need to tell stories about where you're coming from, and this sort of thing. So I like this idea of yarning and storytelling, like yarning our stories together, right? And I think, by the way, the work that some people are doing with sort of trying to tell the story or narrate the story of evolution and the story of the universal expansion. I know that for some people it's cheesy, but I think it's important to not just have the facts and data there, right? If people are going to be able to relate to it, right, it needs to be in story. We're narrative people, right? So I think these types of stories are also part of that, right? But I don't know. I'm not an ethnographer, so I don't know sort of exactly what to say about that. But Kovacs and there's an edited volume by Windsheep that I recently read too, would say that it is a different way of doing ethnography. Because first and foremost, you have to form relationships. Second, you have to gain the trust of the community. Third, you have to tell multiple stories and account for those stories. Fourth, you have to be upfront about how you're going to mobilize that knowledge for the community that you're talking about, right? And I think that that's probably different from a lot of ways that sort of modern science has. I'm not saying that it does now, or modern ways of thinking have looked at indigenous communities, right? It's more of an extractive model, like that sort of thing. So I do think that there is a difference there. I forgot what your second question was. I mean, I don't know about that. My hope is this. So this is, and I don't know how to. Right. Yeah. No, I'm also pessimistic. Probably in some similar ways that Mark is pessimistic. But I do think, right, that what's happening in the face of the phenomena of climate change and globalization is that there is this return to nationalism thing. Let's close the borders. Let's redefine who is really Indonesian, who's really American, who's really Chinese, right? Who's really Hindu, who's really Indian, right? And let's get rid of all the others, right? So there's that sort of return to nationalism, I think, that's happening in the face of increasing climatic disasters and globalization and the problems that have resulted with. That's one reaction. The other reaction is the one that people like some sort of progressive presidents maybe here, maybe in the US. Their model is that, let's just keep on going with neoliberal capitalist sort of globalization with a few tacked on. Let's also care about social justice and the environment, right? And they think this is going to work, and it's just not, right? I don't know what the answer is, but my hope is that to prevent the continued sort of destructive path of neoliberal globalization and the completely destructive path of rising nationalisms that could lead to a world war. What if we have a third way that says, let's look at ourselves as first and foremost planetary citizens, right? That's a tall order. So I don't, but still, I think that we can do this in small ways. I think things like the World Social Forum and pan-indigenous movements. These are things that I look to for a little bit of hope, right? That we can actually begin in small ways to think of ourselves as first and foremost planetary citizens, and secondly as Indonesian, Muslim, Christian, American, like this sort of thing, right? And I think that if we don't have some sort of transition toward that way of thinking that infects our politics at the national and international level, then I'm not sure how else it's going to be, things are going to shift, right? Maybe it's just going to be a catastrophe, right? And that's what's going to force the some sort of change. I don't know.
He thought dynamite was such a horrible weapon of mass destruction that you couldn't imagine the consequences. Dynamite today seems like hat guns. But it's and so our destructive capacities in the last years, in the 1900s, our destructive capacity increased. I don't know that we
Yes, and I think that as long as we're still alive, we can think and imagine and start to act in small, different ways, right? That's the only thing that I have to go by. I can't change the fact that the world is connected right now through airplanes and fossil fuel and jet fuel and stuff. If I want to participate in conversations like this, which I think are important, I'm not saying I need to fly as much, but what I'm saying is that if I want to participate in the conversation and not just sort of stay at home and sort of be isolated and not move around and this sort of thing, and I have to live in the world too, right? So how do we live in the world that I'm going to try to shift it? I mean, I have friends that refuse to fly. And she only takes trains, right? Which means that she goes to one conference a year and it takes her a week to get here. Complete to your back, right? This is another thing. I keep taking this out because I can't hear. But this is another thing that I'm talking about. What is the pace at which we can move around the planet, right? What is a planetary pace, right? It might not be jet fuel, fossil fuel, driving cars, this sort of thing, but it could be trains, ships. It could be, we could move at a different pace, right? And maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing for all of us to move at a little bit of a slower pace. Because think about the anxiety and stress that comes with all you know. We went on, some of us went on this field trip this weekend, got back, it was like a 36-hour field trip and a 9-hour drive and all these sorts of things. We get back Sunday night and I was supposed to get up at 4 a.m. to go get the train to the airport to fly to Jakarta, go to meetings all day and then take the train back, right? Unfortunately, many of the people that were part of that ended up getting COVID. So I didn't have to go there. We just did it online, right? And I was like, I'm really sorry that you got COVID, but I'm so glad I can stay in one place, right? Because my body was tired, right? And we don't.
They will have non-complaints.
No, that. Yeah, no, I have two friends that are one that works for Rolls-Royce, the airplane engine side of it, that are developing these, right? And he says the technology is not that far off. Another friend who's working on EVPs, electric vehicle people movers, EVPMs, and it's basically like a human drone that takes you from from perhaps the airport to, you can get helicopters and some cities from the airport to whatever. This would take you like to point from certain points around the city, right? But they're all solar electric powered, and this sort of thing. So, and the technology is not that far off. What's far off is the industry, and changing the TSA regulations and changing all of the making it affordable, right? Yeah.
On the other hand, too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah, no, it is amazing. It's just not sustainable, but yeah. Yeah.
Maybe your theology background. If I want to say that from the Christian Bible perspective, in Garden Eve, God did not allow Adam and Eve to eat the fruit of the fruit of the tree. But they got the fruit and they eat it, and they fall. And if we analyze every human invention, there is a diversity. The invention, the fossil fuel, and the backside is pollution and climate change. Every human. So, if we can be connected with the fruit of the knowledge of good and the knowledge. And so every human invention, if you can name it plastic, everything else, always there's two, like the two sides of coins, the same coins, but they have two sides.
I mean, I think metaphorically, that's a great, I like that story much better than the 7-day creation story, right? Because Adam's created from the dirt. The only thing I don't like about that story is the intent, or the way it's been interpreted, subordinate women to men. But but Adam's from the dirt, and it's sort of with the other animals, and they only become. Some people have interpreted it this way: they only become self-aware when they eat of the knowledge, right? So before that, they're kind of like innocent creatures, right? Like a cat. Well, maybe not a cat. I don't think cats are innocent. Maybe like dogs, right? Who think that you're God, right? I think that some people have interpreted like humans were kind of innocent in that way before they sort of figured out that they had choices and they could do this or that, and they could, this sort of thing, right? So I think that's an interesting interpretation of it. Yeah, I don't know what else I was going to say about it, but yeah, no, it's an interesting thought. What is it? I mean, what is it that's if anything, humans are perhaps the only. I mean, look, whales can communicate across 1,000 miles. birds can migrate and we can't do that. We can do that with technology, but not on our own, right? All animals have something that are special about them, right? And our special thing perhaps is that we, we don't know what we want to do and we have so many choices, right? And so we can go in so many different directions, right? And so I think that there's a lot of creativity in the lot, but also a lot of possibilities for messing it up. Maybe the one thing that's uniquely human, right, is to have this many possibilities before us, right? To be aware of this many possibilities.
Oh yeah, yeah. Last night I learned about the challenges about the fluorifers that there are two experts that really worry about. They call it like dilemma, or let's say the paradox of tolerance, right? There is an expert who thinks that we should limit the fluorifers, or we should limit the tolerance, because if there is someone who thinks that he should bomb Jakarta, for example, so we should not receive the idea of this guy, right? Or for example, there is someone who thinks to make a virus and spread it all over the world and make the people collapse, make the world collapse. So we should not receive the idea of this person. But another expert said, if you are not tolerant to one idea, so it means that you are not tolerant, right? So there is like the paradox of this, and then I'm really thinking about this, and then so what do you think in the post-human world later on? It's like paradox of dilemma, or should we limit the plurifers, or let's people think what they think? Yeah, I'm still thinking about it.
I always. Okay. So.
Said, and it's one of those things, it's stuff we were talking about exactly these issues of tolerance and human rights and things like that. And you said there's one important point: we do not have the right to think.
Yeah.
And that must have been 20 years ago, and that statement has stuck in my mind ever since. And I think that's a real good point to keep.
That's what I was gonna. I think something similar, right? Does it? Here's where sort of freedom ends and concern for individuals begins, right? If someone were to deliver anthrax somewhere and said that that's what they're going to do to a Bauman place, does that hurt other people? Yes.
Yes.
Whether or not a woman decides to wear a hijab or not, does that hurt anybody else?
Up to the woman.
Right, because it doesn't hurt anybody else, right? So that's what that's kind of my thing. And if you look at the Quakers, not the Quakers, help me out here. The Amish, thank you, the Amish, right? The Amish have a long list of about 24 questions in 3 different sections, 8 questions each, that they look at before they officially, as a community, adopt a technology. How does this technology change myself? How does it change our community? How does it change our relationship with the earth, with the rest of the natural world, right? And before adopting any technology, they go through this and think about it together, right? That's the kind of thing we need to be doing, not just saying anything goes, right? Violence towards others, right? That's I don't know, yeah. For me, that's my look. There may be people that argue for certain things that I disagree with, right? But that's what the public sphere is for, is to argue these things out. You tell me why putting a pipeline through North the Dakotas is good, right? If it's going through these people's lands and causing all these sorts of, you tell me what kind of world you're trying to build, right? And let's talk about it in public. And I'll tell you why I don't want that to happen. And which world do you want to live in, right? That's the kind of conversation we need to be having, right? but we don't have many public spaces to have that kind of conversation anymore, right? Everything's so polarized in many ways, and we have no forums really that I know of other than something like the World Social Forum or something, to have international conversations like this, right? I don't know. But yeah, I think if does what you're doing hurt someone else?
Yeah, because
Right.
what
Yes. Okay.
most famous, I think it, the Avengers Endgame, and many people are really becoming suddenly fans of tennis, right? Because he has idea that you have to kill a half of the world to make it balanced, and I don't really agree with that because how could you make it a half and the world directly balanced? Because people will make a child again, right? People are not a half of the world will not stay a half. They will make a child and a child and a child, and there will be a new people and people again, right? So it's not going to be balanced that easy.
Yeah, that's why that's not really a solution.
Yeah, so it's not trying to do something. But many people like.
But I mean, it gets tricky though. It gets tricky though, right?
Yeah.
No, seriously, I think that the way in which I hate doing this, but I'm going to keep doing it. The way in which Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are pouring resources to get off this planet, I think is harmful.
Yeah.
I think it's harmful to lots of people, and it's harmful to the future development of technologies that could help us to find better ways to live on this planet, right? Rather than creating this escapism that more and more people are buying into, right? And more people are buying into it. And I think that is creating a narrative that is dangerous because it's an elitist narrative. Not very few people are going to get off this planet if it comes down to it, right? Yeah. Yeah.
As, oh, we have already selected the.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, Stephen Hawking, unfortunately, was one of these people too. We have about 100 years to find another planet before this planet is destroyed. He thought the same thing, right? And I don't know. That's where it gets tricky, right? Because some people would say it's his own money. Is it really his own money though? Do you really get that rich without stealing money from somebody else and stealing labor and resources from other people? I don't know. But that's the kind of tricky ethical thing, right? Because it's easy to, when you use the bombing or the killing thing, that's easy. But when you use something like ultra rich people investing in technologies to get us off the planet, right? That's kind of where it's like, now get me off the planet. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Who are also, by the way, billionaire. Oh, it's time to go. Why didn't somebody say anything? These billionaire preppers, right? Billionaires are spending lots and lots of money on building these luxurious bunkers underground for when everything goes to hell, right? Complete with hiring Navy SEALs to guard their bunkers. And the questions they asked are like, what's going to happen when how are we going to pay these Navy SEALs to guard us when the money system goes away? Gold bars, should we get gold bars, right? I know. But these are that's the detailed concern that these people are articulating in terms of knowing that their life is under threat because it can't last forever. So they're building bunkers underground, right? Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Thank you all. I hear it's time to go.
All right.